My name is Alexandra Pringle, and I have the great joy and honour of being on the advisory board of the Bradford Literature Festival, and have been doing this for the last 3 years. It's a festival I feel very passionately about, one that brings important voices out into the world. And as a publisher of some 40 years, this is really the heart of what I do. This panel today, I think, is exceptional for various reasons. I'm going to introduce our speakers first and then talk about what we're going to talk about. So I'll start at the end. Dr. Hellyer is an expert on geopolitics and security studies in the Middle East and Europe. He's a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He's operated at the nexus of government policy and think tanks for the past 20 years. Formerly deputy convener of the UK's government task force on radicalisation, he has also served in the UK Foreign Office. He is also the author of 10 books and, as we all know, is very regularly in the media talking about world events, particularly those we're going to talk about today. Next to him is Salman Shaikh, who is the founder and CEO of the Shaikh Group, a specialized peace-building organization dedicated to mitigating and resolving violent conflict with a focus on the Middle East and North Africa. Salman has extensive experience leading mediation and Track 2 diplomacy initiatives with a focus on Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, the Gulf region, and Iran. He has previously worked in the United Nations in a number of offices, and he has lived in Gaza and in East Jerusalem. And then next to him is Lubna Masarwa. And I think that this is the thing that's going to make this panel quite different from a lot that we have, because she is Palestinian. She is Middle East Eye's Palestine and Israel Bureau Chief based in Jerusalem. She happens to be in the UK at the moment, which is why she's here. She's a Palestinian grassroots activist, journalist, and community organizer. She has co-founded and directed numerous initiatives aimed at empowering youth and challenging the siege on Gaza. As the coordinator for Palestine's Alternative Information Center, she led a Girls for Leadership program in Jerusalem, focusing on nurturing young Palestinian women leaders. She is also a Sufi and a meditation teacher. Wow. So what we're going to talk about now is Gaza, in the past, of course, the present, but importantly, to try and envisage a future, if we can. As it says in the program, this event will trace the roots of the Palestinian struggle, beginning with the Balfour Declaration, and from there we move to the present reality of blockade, dispossession, and resilience before turning to the future. What we need to think about is what might Gaza become in 2040? What does that mean? What is that rebuilding? How can sovereignty, healing, and cultural renewal possibly take root, given everything that's going on? So I would like to begin with the past for a bit. And I would like to know, first of all, from you, Lubna, what your childhood was like growing up, how the Nakba was in your life, and what the past meant to you.
Wow. First of all, I want to thank you and for organizing this amazing activity and to take time to recognize all the activism you have been doing for Palestine. It's very appreciated and very noticed by us in Gaza and West Bank and among the Palestinians inside Israel as well. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I was born in a small village inside Israel. And my two parents are survivors of the 48 Nakba. And I grew up in a house with the memories and the trauma of my parents. My father specifically had been a refugee for 2 years from our village. So I grew up in the shadow and in the experience and the stories of 48 and of the catastrophe that happened to my people. And this is going with me. I think this being second generation of Nakba survivors had shaped my life, had shaped my activity and the path I chose, also as an activist, also as a journalist. And I see the reality today that happening in Gaza and also around the unspoken war that is going on in the West Bank as well is another stage of what had begun in 1948. Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't expect this question in a way of I'm so much occupied with the present that, like, my history, personal history with my parents and my life had skipped away.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. And less personal history. As Salman, I'd love to know what you think are the deepest roots of the situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very good to be here, my second time at the festival, and thank you for coming on your Saturday morning to listen to us. My own family history, just very quickly, is I'm originally Pakistani, so my parents were part of another moment in history, which was the partition. I was born actually in the India-Pakistan war as well, and yet I've been drawn to the Middle East pretty much most of my adult life. And as you said, Alexandra, I lived in Gaza in 2000, working for the UN Middle East Peace Envoy, Terry Rod-Larsen, both before and then as the Second Intifada started. I'm going to say something to you which perhaps I shouldn't say. I've been pretty much working in diplomacy for most of my life now, my adult working life. And yet all the kind of agreements or tactical efforts that we've made in order to de-escalate conflict, try and bring Israelis and Palestinians together at the elite level, I think masks something. And that is to go back to where you wanted us to start in the past. We are now seeing actually the unveiling of a much longer project by Jewish Zionists to establish a greater Israel on what was the land of Palestine. That started towards the end of the last century. I'm sure some of you read Theodor Herzl's pronouncements on this, introducing the idea of a homeland for the Jewish people. And then, of course, the efforts of Chaim Weizmann and Rothschild and others in the Jewish Congress, working with Secretary Balfour and, of course, Lloyd George, to realize that, of course, given what happened to the Jews in the Second World War, I am completely sympathetic to the idea of a safe place for Jews in what has now become the land of Israel. I myself still work towards the idea of Palestinian self-determination and Palestinian rights as part of a two-state solution. We can discuss whether or not that is viable, but I just want to mention one or two more names now. And those are Bibi Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel, and people like Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir. These are the new names which are now realizing this dream of a greater Israel, but which extinguishes the idea of a Palestinian state or a Palestinian land. And that, in fact, when I now look in its totality, is what the project is and the project has been. Smotrich and Ben Gvir were very much on the extreme edge of what we were doing diplomacy in 2000. Benjamin Netanyahu was not, but he's enabled them, and this is where we are today. I guess we'll talk about the future in terms of what are the scenarios, and here it's either something dramatic, which leads us to some hope, or it will be a continuation of this destruction.
Thank you. Dr. Hellyer, Can we talk just a tiny bit about the Balfour Declaration and where you see that sits? What do you think was its greatest mistake?
So first, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back in Bradford, a beautiful city. I've never been to Bradford when it's this humid. Not exactly typical for the north, but the Literature Festival has been a real mainstay in the city's calendar, and I think you can all see why. And I won't say too much about my own personal history, except that my father comes from a long line in that regard, because he was involved in, some people might remember something called the Young Liberals, before there was something called the Liberal Democrats. And my father was very active in the Palestine Solidarity campaign back then, and also in the anti-apartheid movement. And I remember when apartheid fell, he said there were two struggles that he hoped to see resolved during his lifetime. And he was pleased to see one, and he didn't think he would see the other. And of course, the other was the occupation of Palestine. He was from Sussex, out in the countryside near Crawley. My mother was from Cairo, and of course lived through all of the wars that Egypt has been involved in vis-a-vis the Israelis during the 20th century. And when I think about the historical context of this, you mentioned the Balfour Declaration. I think that we also have to consider something that goes much further back than that, at least in terms of parallels to what we see today. Of course, the Balfour Declaration, to my mind, was the representation of a terrible impulse from the UK, thinking that they had the right to actually promise somebody else's land to another people, irrespective of the horrific situation that those other people had been through, which I'm not disputing, but is, to my mind, not the point. But there's something else that goes far beyond that, which is that the Holy Land, Palestine, has been the target of kingdoms, communities, let's say political entities going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And when you consider the Crusader kingdoms that came about, there's quite a few lessons there, including the fact that they didn't last. And they didn't last because the only way for them to have been brought into being was either the surrounding area being incapable of engaging effectively with that entity, or a foreign actor being a very powerful sponsor for that entity, or both. And it was usually both that made sure that they could persist. But once both of those were removed, the reality of those two things were removed, and they didn't last for very long unless they actually tried to become part and parcel of the region, integrate into the region, and integrate into the peoples of the region. And I think that that's a very good question for today. Where are the efforts being done in that regard? What is the direction of travel? What are the main strategic sort of decisions that are being made? And of course, when it comes to the UK, because of course we're sitting in the UK, where's the responsibility of the UK in this problem? Also capacity. Or shall we say ability, because frankly the UK doesn't have the same ability that it once did, right? But still a responsibility to act according to certain principles, I don't think is useless, I don't think is irrelevant, and I do think is important for us to think about as well in the context of this discussion.
Mm-hmm. So before we come to where we are right now, I'd like to make this a little bit personal, which is to take us into Gaza and to ask each of you if you have whether there is one story, one image, one moment that personally means a lot to you and represents Gaza for you. Salman, do you have one?
Sure. I'm a slim guy. The only time I put on weight was a restaurant in the center of Gaza called Matuk. most amazing Palestinian food the time that I worked there. And I particularly remember a gathering of friends, families we all worked together in Gaza at that time. It was a birthday party for Rania and a young child. Now today, there are 4,500 children who have needed hospital help because they're malnourished in Gaza as of last month. That's just last month's figure, and it's growing. So that's how far we have come. And we have come that far because we have not stopped it. American president has not stopped it, and usually it's an American president. Since the 60s, I know, eventually an American president says, no, we haven't had that. And our government hasn't stopped it, I regret to say. No European government has stopped it. I could give you more memories. One more is one of the most shameful personal moments I've had was when the Second Intifada started. At that time, I was working just as a political officer before I became the special assistant of the envoy. We were evacuated, wearing flak jackets and helmets as those first bombs came next to our offices into Arafat's compound. And I was looking at those kids as we were driving out. It's got to be one of the most humiliating moments of my life.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Hisham, do you have one?
So I think when earlier this year, I hate calling it a ceasefire agreement, but the pause in fighting that took place towards the end of the Biden administration, the beginning of the Trump administration. Of course, there was a lot of fanfare around this. I have to say, and I said this at the time, I didn't think it was going to last for very long. And I didn't think it was going to last very long because, frankly, the Israelis made it very clear that they had no intention of holding to any such pause. So I didn't have the greatest, how should we say, degree of optimism that we wouldn't be right back where we started and worse pretty soon. So in that regard, you can see that where I was coming from was pretty cynical in the first place. But seeing all of these people pick up and head towards the north on foot to get back to their homes, knowing that the homes were not there anymore, knowing that they would be going there to rebuild, irrespective of how analytically I thought this was all going to work out, you could not but admire the resilience in people like that. And I don't want to say this in a way that exhaustizes the resilience aspect, because we have this a lot when it comes to the Arab world. We say, oh, they're so resilient, they can put up with everything. It's exhausting. It's tiring. It's traumatic day in, day out. And it shouldn't be, turned into this great, wonderful thing that they can bear. On the contrary, it should make all of us feel incredibly embarrassed. It really should. About our own resilience, but then also about what we're doing to help them. But it was quite extraordinary to see those crowds just move and refuse to give up.
Yeah, it was. Lubna.
Meanwhile, I got used to the light, to the darkness.
I know, so strange.
To the
It's
sea.
really hard to see.
Yeah. I've been covering this war since 7th of October in a daily basis. Every day I'm in touch with a large scale of journalists and friends. I've been speaking every morning with my colleagues. I receive a lot of footage that I go through. I told Alexandra yesterday, so I seen everything, witnessed from abroad, everything with my colleagues. And there's many amazing stories and powerful ones and sad ones, and it's endless. But the scene that that remained strongly was the same scene in January this year, during the ceasefire time, watching over 600,000 people marching from the south to the north, going back to their homes, to their destroyed houses. I interviewed a mother who lost her 2 children, her husband. She walked all the way with a small bag to her house, and her house was destroyed. So she built a tent near the house, and she stayed there. This scene has been very emotional as well for us, because transfer, Nakba, displacement is a big thing in our history, back to the past and to the ongoing displacement. And that moment made me in person feel that it's possible, even if it was a stolen moment of history, that we don't know what is the future. And of course, the war continued, and Shuja'iyya and everything was destroyed. But to this possibility of coming back, of returning back, I looked at my father, who was in his late 80s, sitting half meter from the TV and watching, and tears in his eyes, because this is, again, brought to our memory the Nakba, the 48 Nakba, with 800,000 Palestinians being displaced and transferred to elsewhere. So this scene of this tsunami, of this moving, is this going on donkeys, in a broken cars, walking. One of the women described for me the bodies that people were killed in the way, so they could see dead bodies in the way, this determination. I think it's all about this for us as Palestinians in time. That power is so strong. The determination, in my experience, is the field that can defeat the impossible power of the Western governments and Israel in particular. So this scene was a moment, very, very strong moment for me, for my colleagues, for my family. We all the time started to message each other, from Yafa to Haifa to Nur Shams refugee camp to Jerusalem to Gaza, just sharing a moment of hope, of liberation, of determination, of nothing can kill us, nothing can finish the Palestinians. So yeah.
Thank you very much. So let's look at the present now before we move to the future, the hardest thing really. And I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on what you feel are the most misunderstood aspects of Gaza's situation at the moment in the media, the global media, and also in policy circles. Hisham, do you have a feeling of that?
Sure. So first, it really depends where you're talking about. So if we're limiting this to the UK, actually within the policy arena in the UK, I'm not talking about the political arena per se in terms of political leadership, but the policy arena, I think, understands things pretty well. It's not that they don't. It's what political decisions are made on top, which I think make, unfortunately, the difference. But they do actually get it, and they get it quite well. I remember going into one of these policy meetings fairly early on in the war, and just alluding just briefly to the West Bank, and I was stopped by somebody who was, a full-time government official, and said, it's much worse than that. And he rallied off, a litany of things that had happened in the past 48 hours. So things that actually, some of which I didn't even know about yet. So it's not that they didn't know, and it's not that they're not angry, and that they're not upset. Actually, there's a huge amount of anger within the system on this. But it's also about what happens on the political level on top, and then what they can do about it, given what's going on there. In the wider conversation, where to start, in terms of the media? First, and this I think is really quite crucial and still hasn't been fixed, Gaza is an occupied territory. And I don't think people really understand what that means. It's been an occupied territory since 1967. The 2005, quote-unquote, Israeli disengagement did not end that occupation status. It continues to be an occupied territory even after 2005. That presents certain obligations on the Israelis as the occupying power within the territory of Gaza. So when people start talking about Israel's right to self-defense, I don't think they really understand what legal obligations apply here. Okay, saying that Israel has the right to self-defense in this particular situation is like saying that London has the right to self-defense against Bradford if a terrorist group ran out of Bradford and started attacking London. It's not the same. It's not the same framing, and the framing is really important because the Israelis, for years since the disengagement, have tried to push for this notion that actually Gaza is not occupied, that it's sui generis sort of territory, that it's in a category on its own, and as a result is not the responsibility of the Israelis in terms of pretty much anything. And of course, that's just not true. They are in full occupation of the territory and have been since 1967, and that has not discontinued at all. So when we talk about, for example, the humanitarian situation and so on, it's not that Israel is obliged to allow for foreign aid to get into Gaza. Of course they are. They're obliged to provide it themselves. They're obliged to provide welfare, electricity, everything that an occupying power under the Geneva Connections is actually obliged to provide. I don't think people really understand what this means because when you put that frame in, it dramatically changes the discussion around what the Israelis can or cannot do, what they're obliged to do in terms of the welfare of the population, and also how many laws are being broken, especially against the context of the ICJ ruling, the International Court of Justice rulings, the ICC, and so on. So that, to me, has been something that personally I've pushed back against again and again and again over the past now almost 21 months. Because I think it is so foundational to how we discuss this.
And you touched earlier on the situation of the West Bank right now. So, Lubna, I'd love it if we were talking about it earlier, described to us here about what is going on outside Gaza as well, because this is important.
Yeah, I think alongside the war against Gaza, Israel started an unspoken war, a war that is unspoken in the West Bank, and they launched a massive military campaign in the Palestinian towns and villages, mostly in north of the West Bank, Tulkarem and Jenin, which we didn't seen since the last Intifada. Israel, for the first time, using airstrike in the West Bank. And we're talking about more than 40,000 people were displaced from Nur Shams refugee camp near Tulkarem and Jenin. People who originally are refugees from areas of 1948. So the scenes of displacement have been very massive. A whole refugee camps, huge areas have been emptied completely from the residents. Alongside of this, the West Bank looked completely different in these 2 years. So driving there, a month ago, I took MP Shaukat Adam and MP Andrew George around all the villages and the towns of the West Bank are closed with gates, yellow gates. So a community of 40,000 people near Hebron, simply they open the gate for them between 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning. And all the other day, it's closed. So someone who need to go to life, or if you have somebody who need to reach hospital, have to go under the gate, and then the ambulance will come in the other side. So the Palestinians completely under siege. I was stuck in the town of Hebron, which is a huge city, until 10 o'clock, because simply the army decided to close all the exits. So Israel, looking at the situation now with the shadow under Gaza, and the world is busy and the world doesn't care and give Israel an open ticket to do whatever they want, they think, the politicians, and they speak about it openly, that it's the best opportunity, a big window for us to go ahead with annexation of the West Bank, with building, now they declared building hundreds of thousands of settlement units in the West Bank, which is the largest since decades. Also with this, there's a massive attacks by the settlers, huge. It's happening every day. I just showed Alexandra an hour ago the views and the footage I received from the people destroying houses, burning houses. 20 people simply were killed by settlers. Over 700 people were killed in the West Bank since October 7. Groups of hundreds and dozens of settlers who aiming to just transfer the Palestinians, attacking every day the villages, and there's no one to protect them. Simply no one to protect them. Not the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority has no authority, and the army doesn't care, and we have the fascist government we ever had, so no one care about it. And Palestinians in the West Bank now really facing a very dangerous war, like, I don't have words to describe it in all scenes, and they are mostly exposed. And because of the silence of the West, of the governments, of the Arabs as well, it's going ahead, and this is the reality. Also inside in Jerusalem, the Aqsa Mosque had been invaded. The settlers inside. I told a friend 2 weeks, like a month ago, I went every day to pray in the Aqsa, and this was the first time I felt stranger in my city. The amount of army, the amount of settlers, the amount of Israeli flag, the control of when I can enter and when I can't, the division of the time and a place that we thought it's just like assumption, it is reality now. People in the Aqsa can't fix a window without authority of the Israelis. My colleagues who working in the Islamic Waqf ordered toys for the library inside the Aqsa. It took them a month until they received the permission from the Israeli to give them, to allow them. So there's so much happening in the West Bank, so much happening inside Israel among the Palestinian community, 2 million Palestinian residents living inside Israel as well, facing massive attacks, imprisoning, not to mention also the case of the prisoners, and Israel engineering and shaping reality in the West Bank. Now we live like in ghettos, all towns closed with the walls, tiles, army bases, eviction, the transfer of Area C, which is 60% of what's so-called going to be a Palestinian country, is taken now mostly by settlers with the support of the Israeli government. And this is bring to us what a platform, what we have. We are in a point, I think, as a Palestinian, that we need to rethink again of what a platform we have. With the failure of the Western society, with the failure of what's so-called international law, I became allergic of even mentioning international law, and of seeing our people being starved to death. So the Western community can't, and I'm meaning Western community, I refer to the governments, not to the people, the public, because the public is changing, and we see that, and this is maybe where our hope hides. But if a government or a minister or an MK can't condemn starvation of a child, why he would pay any attention for the West Bank? So it's really, I think this is the biggest historic time in our life, that with the sense of uncertainty, and Israel, it's no man's land. It's no man's land. I went to Hebron. It's crazy. You go to the old city. They ask me if I'm Muslim, because there's a road, Shuhada Street, is not allowed for the residents, the Palestinian residents. So I said I'm Christian. So he let me in because I was with internationals. But Palestinian residents in Hebron, which is one of the biggest cities in the West Bank, can't simply walk in a Shuhada Street that link one side of their city to the other side. 1,500 Palestinian shops are closed by the army, and this is this is fine for the world. They still can travel and can come to England, to Europe, and we can't walk in our streets. Imagine if it was a Jewish person not allowed to walk in a neighborhood somewhere in France, or what it will create. So the West Bank, it is a massive war, and this war is not spoken, and it should be highlighted. What's happening there is very dangerous.
My abiding memory of the West Bank, which I think for so many people who've been there, is in Hebron, walking, and this was way before, this was years ago, walking down the street to the market and looking up and seeing these nets and Israeli flags in Palestinian houses that had been taken, and asking, why are there these nets? And it's because the Israelis threw rocks onto the women and children as they walked to market. And so they put the nets up, so instead of throwing rocks, they would throw urine and feces and nails. And that, for me, was the absolute image I went away with after.
Now imagine a friend of us dies in the old city of Hebron, and you need to take his body out. And imagine a bunch of men going in the mountains and hills with the body, because they are not allowed to take the main road, even in this situation. And think also about all the settlers throwing wine at the Muslim women in the old city, because they know they are they're not the Muslim and conservative and don't to drink alcohol. And this is happening, and this is,
So you said you didn't want to use the words international law, but I just wanted Salman for you to touch on the death of international law.
Please don't say something else.
I'm going to try.
Please don't.
I'm going to try to see, and I completely agree with what Hisham and Lubna have said in terms of where we're at, but try and think, how can we just go forward in the present before we talk about the future? As such. First of all, let us recognize that this Israeli government has lost a global narrative war. Despite everything where the media is, my 16-year-old daughter or my 15-year-old son in Paris, who I am, but also French, Italian, and live in a different universe, pick up and tell me things because of what they're picking up on social media. And they are like millions of other kids and adults who have been able to pick through the propaganda narrative, or quote unquote, the impartiality of some of the media, which has meant that somehow you think that no one cares. Actually, a lot of people care. And I think you're a testament to that too. Israel has lost the global narrative war. And we have to ask ourselves, then what? And by the way, before I go further, I had people, some relative distant acquaintances, sort of writing to me when those missiles were falling on Tel Aviv from Iran, saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say this, but I'm kind of happy. No, but that's where we've got to. That's where we've got to. And of course, this should be a red fire alarm for Israelis in terms of their security. If they believe that what they or their government is saying, and those who are shilling for this government, that's the reality. It's not, and people can see through it. Secondly, we have to recognize that the Israeli government works at the sort of top level, but it also grinds people down in the diplomatic and political arena. I've seen 3, I think, US secretaries of state being reduced to be counting the number of trucks that are going into Gaza. Literally. And celebrating when that truck or trucks go in. It started with Colin Powell, actually. I saw it with Condi Rice as well. So that's the method that is employed. Now, how do we overcome this environment? And I do have to go to international law. International law is our North Star, but we have to we have to insist upon it. I live in a small flat, as well as in Paris, just around the Israeli embassy in Kensington. And I've seen the protests over the years. Some of the more recent ones, I went up to one young, I guess he was my sort of background, British Pakistani Muslim guy, and I started to talk to him in Kensington Gardens. And I asked him, why are you doing this? And he started to quote to me international law. Now, do we want this kid to go and do something else? Or do we want him to actually look for international law to be enforced? I was with Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2005 when we had the World Summit for the Responsibility to Protect, which was just another chapter of us hoping as humanity that we could move forward from the horrors of those two world wars and create a system of international law that would protect people and that would speak for their rights and guarantee them as such. And yet, of course, that's not what's happened. We have the ICJ investigation alleging Israel committing genocide, and of course we have the ICC indictments to Benjamin Netanyahu and others as well. First step, I think we have to ask our British government, what is the legal advice that they are getting, and they should be publishing it now, in terms of what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. We have to insist on that. Secondly, we need leadership that says, sorry, Mr. President, United States, trade deals and everything else are important, but we cannot continue to hew. And I think actually President Trump may well only respect people who have real strength of conviction in terms of what they want and what they mean. In this case, that's absolutely urgent. And of course, given what we discussed about the past, we have a particular responsibility in that regard. So only on these bases do we have a foundation then in order to be able to do the really difficult work that's required to stop the killing, get the hostages out, get aid in, but then start to create a different reality when it comes to Palestine and Israel.
So to the future, I want to be able to give some time for questions. But this is what we've been asked to do, is to think about the future. First of all, I'd like to have for us to have a sort of active imagination, because the rubric for this event, it said the year 2040. If a child is born today, they'll be 15 in that year. And what will their life in Gaza be? If a child is born in Gaza today, which is happening, how do you see that world before we go on to saying how we're going to get there? Dr. Hellyer, do you have a...
Maybe in the interest of questions from the audience, perhaps Lubna should answer that one.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Future. I have no doubt that Palestine will be free. And I know it in my cells and in my body. And I can promise you, like, we're very stubborn people. We're very stubborn. We are very connected to the land. And I can promise you that our struggle will not end until Palestine is free. And this is, for me, this is what makes me feel peace in a personal level. We are simply sure that we will free Palestine. And I can promise you that, again, we will struggle to that to happen. Yeah, that's that's. I'm saying that because I'm also telling myself that struggling, dying, being killed is part of this liberation. And I must look at the future much beyond the today, to look at the stars and not only in the waves and the storm. And I see also that level, and I feel fine as long I want to resist to end this injustice. That's my answer to your question. I don't want to romanticize. I don't want to romanticize the future, and I don't know if it will be freed in my time, but we are like trees, and you cut us and we grow again. We have very deep roots, and it could sound spiritual and not realistic, but I think what will defeat the power of Israel is our determination. We survived in 1948. Israel had plans against Gaza in 1967. There were 300,000 Gazans, and they didn't know what to do with them. There are 2 million. Even if they transfer, some of us, we will remain. Something, the flame, we keep going on. And this is what matters for me, that I will fight and resist to my last breath. And this is what will get us to that future and seeing Gaza rebuilt again, and Palestine and the West Bank and everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can we have the lights up a little bit to see for the questions? Okay. Are there any questions? There's one there.
Thank you very much for the panel's observations. I agree, Salman, in terms of publishing the advice that the government have been given in response to international law issues that have been raised. But I wondered from the panel's perspective, what about sanctions? What about what individuals can do? We touched on what happened in South Africa, and it was effective in terms of ending apartheid in South Africa. What's the panel's view in relation to that?
Someone, do you want to start?
Yes, sure. I mentioned the World Summit Responsibility to Protect, which has within it, this is a norm, it's a legal norm that was put forward, is that if a country or society is not protecting its people, then yes, there is and there should be legal grounds on which to intervene. That can go all the way from censure to sanctions to even military enforcement as such. So here, somebody who works in diplomacy, where we're always trying to find a way in which not to antagonize sides, but to bring them together. But I must say, in this case, I find the case for sanctions now compelling. And I find even what the European Union did in terms of looking at its association agreement, seeing that there were violations, then not doing anything, as being a very bad signal in addition to what the UK should be doing.
Lubna.
I meant on an individual basis as well, as individuals. I know that there's a lot of encouragement for people as individuals to boycott.
I think the boycott is the only, not the only, but like one of the most important things that we can do. I don't think Israel will stop killing Palestinians. Israel will not come to peace agreement with Palestine and say, we regret and we give you the land and we stop occupying you. I think will make a difference when they start to feel the pressure from outside. When academics feel they can't publish their articles anymore in journals, when universities who, by the way, like last week, 972 published that 7 universities in Israel have 57 units for soldiers, training soldiers, teaching soldiers. So Israel is a small country. When Israel feels isolated by international community, then will make a difference. And I do think that sanctions and BDS are the answer for this situation.
I had a head of a major publishing house in Britain take me for a coffee because I put something on my Instagram about sanctions. And he said that you are doing what would start, because he's Jewish, burning books. It's like it is what happened during the Second World War. And that was really a moment. Dr. Hellyer, do you have anything?
So just a couple of things on sanctions. There's been a lot of media chatter about this, right? Especially in the last few months with regards to the UK and with regards to Europe in terms of sanctions, prescription of particular individuals like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. And you're asking about what, on an individual level, people can do. First, not to be, I hate to be so horrible about this, not to be taken in by signals as opposed to actual policies. So sanctioning Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, which I'm very happy about, as in, let their lives be absolutely awful, but this is nothing. This is literally nothing. The settlement enterprise itself is illegal, not only in international law, but here in the UK. Our own legal system has made it very clear that these are occupied territories, hence ABC should be happening. And there's very little pressure on the system to make that happen. And I agree completely that the Israelis will not change their policies until they feel that there's a consequence as a result of their actions. They don't feel that. They feel that the world is against them, that the narrative has changed, that there's a lot of media that doesn't like them, but they also feel very empowered and operate in an environment of frankly, utter impunity, because they know that from the Europeans, yes, there'll be some European states that are very critical, Spain, Ireland, Belgium, like there are quite a few. It's not, the West isn't the monolith in this regard, but that the big consequences have not come anywhere near that, because the United States is still very much in support. And the European Union, despite the fact it having recognized that Article 2, which is about human rights and so on, has been violated, it's going to be a mammoth task to get anything through the European Union when it comes to the Israelis. So continuing that pressure on a ground level, making sure that your MPs know how important this is. Again, I don't think about this in the space of a week, a month, or even 15 years in terms of 2040. I think further beyond that. And I think that, and I also go back to my father, God rest his soul, Palestine, anti-apartheid. The apartheid movement was not won in a day. Okay, it took a long time. There were many things that came together all at once. So I think a lot of people thought that boycotting South Africa was what brought it down. It's one of the things that had to fit into that puzzle, and then it finally came to fruition. I think people have to think long-term about that, and they should also learn how to deploy these arguments in ways that go far beyond this room, that go far beyond those who are already sympathetic. Because there are many who are out there who I think have changed their minds a lot in the past couple of years, but the basic argument that we all share, which is occupation is wrong and the treatment of people in this way is just fundamentally immoral, I don't think people realize it's as simple as that. And I think that when you learn to deploy these arguments in ways that can cut through the noise and can show that this is just about being a decent human being, then I think it really does cut through. I'll say one last thing if you don't. Sorry, Salman.
Yeah, no,
because there are a lot of faces in the room that look really depressed. And I want to say something to you as somebody who deals with this literally on a day, sometimes hourly basis, trying to keep track of everything that's going on. And I'll tell you that every one of you who feels depressed, you should feel very grateful, because there are a whole bunch of people in this world who don't feel anything anymore. And that's the real catastrophe for those people. The fact you feel that pain is proof that you're still alive and you have an inch of humanity left in you. And I would feel very grateful about that, and I do myself.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to jump in. I actually think we have, in the next 6 months to a year, it's going to be absolutely crucial. When I talk to Arab leaders or whatever, even they worry that Gaza is gone.
Yeah.
That what is going on, of course, Gazans will stay, but in what form and in what condition, well, we can only shudder to think, given what's already been normalized as such. And I would say, since we're in Bradford and we're in the UK, don't believe those who think that the UK government can't make a difference. I can tell you in the world of diplomacy it can, both in terms of building coalitions of the willing with other like-minded states. We are a member of the UN Security Council, a veto-wielding member. We are a member of the G7, the G20. For a couple of weeks, even David Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, set the agenda. So don't think that the UK cannot have more of a catalytic impact if it was to recognize a Palestinian state, if it was to be much clearer on international law. And I would say to you, I'm a Labour Party member, so let me just get a little bit personal for a second. In Liverpool, you have a Labour Party conference in the next 4 months. I can tell you, Labour leadership is already looking at its legacy, and it will be in the backdrop of what's going on in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and the Middle East, which could potentially be going up in flames. Because actually there are, just for 1 second, talking about the future, I was 29 years of age when I first went to Gaza. I'm now 54. And so it's more than 15 years that we've endured, and I've seen that Palestinians have endured, and I've seen this, where we are today. So 15 years, we could have a lot more of the same, but worse. And what is it that, to me, is the project? Well, it's on a billboard in Washington right now, the new Middle East, where you have Arab leaders and Israel, and led by the United States, building a new Middle East, which basically, again, is part of the extinguishing of the Palestinian issue. I don't believe that will happen. I don't believe Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and others
came to cover the war with Iran immediately after.
Yes.
But I don't believe how much of it is true.
Well, it's not true, but that is what is being imagined. I don't believe Saudi Arabia will move towards normalizing with Israel.
I don't.
It won't.
No.
But this is what is being put forward, as what's going to happen in the future. And of course,
I think in the future, the public opinion in the world now, the millions who have been going in the streets, hundreds of thousands, amazing scenes from London and Europe and France, I think they will change the leadership that at the moment collaborating with Israel. And this is what's also give me some sort of optimism that this scene is bigger than this moment, and these generations in the world will change the government, they will change the leadership, and something will shift. And this is what Israel have to consider as well.
So this is the moment where grassroots activity
yes.
is of primary importance, so that every single person can do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've run out of time. Do we have time for
Yes.
another question? Are we out? No? Okay. I'm so sorry. I think we are out of time, yeah? I'm really sorry. I'm sure that the panelists would be happy to have a word in private just afterwards. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. And thank you most of all to this incredible panel and for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and Lubna, your life with us. Thank you very much indeed.